There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's positive or negative.
The Yankees have swept the Twins.
Minnesota Sports Chat has you covered. Talking nothing but Minnesota sports all year long. It's time now for the soon-to-be award-winning, if only in his own mind, Minnesota Sports Chat with your host, Ross Brendel.
And for those of you watching on YouTube, you know today's guest will be Mr. Manny Hill. We'll get to him in just moments. If only everybody knew the technical difficulties that sometimes happen when you do these podcast things for the interwebs, and all of you, I think you'd probably laugh a little bit at what happens here behind the scenes. This is edition number 242 of the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat. It is presented, and don't you forget it, by my friends at Beans Coffee Company. All the Golden Gophers do is win at Camp Randall in Madison, Wisconsin, and all the Minnesota Vikings do is win, win, win. They're now 10-2 on the season as they prepare for Kirk Cousins, we think, and the struggling Atlanta Falcons. Joining me today from Jazz 88, MPS Voices, contributor for Purple Insider, contributor, well, I shouldn't say contributor, 1500 ESPN behind the scenes and SKOR North guy. Can't forget about his public address work for the city of Hastings and Hastings High School. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something else, but he will correct me. It is Mr. Manny Hill. Manny, my guy. Happy Tuesday morning.
Yeah, I have nothing to correct you on. I just realized how many jobs that I have. Just realized how many gigs I actually have.
That is, I don't want to rip the business that we make most of our money in, but that's kind of the reality of what we do here. We all have our hands in different cookie jars. And if you like cookies, like clearly I do, well, then this is the business for that. We'll talk Gopher football, but let's actually start with the Minnesota Vikings, who are now 10-2. For the most part, Sam Darnold appears to be back on track. We had that part, I guess we would call the middle for 12 games, when the Vikings lost 2 in a row and looked like maybe you needed to unplug Sam Darnold and plug him back in to get him going again. It appears the Minnesota Vikings have done that. He has over 800 passing yards in the last 3 games, no interceptions. I think it's 7 touchdown passes, but it might be 8. Manny, if you would have said at the beginning of the year the Vikings were 10-2 at this point in the season, I think literally everybody would have said one of 2 things. Sam Darnold got hurt and Nick Mullins or Brett Rippon are having the season of a lifetime. Or Sam Darnold is the best version of himself in the NFL, and that is clearly what has happened so far. It continues to just be a very fun Minnesota Vikings team to watch after coming back. They beat the Cardinals on Sunday 23-22. Looked awful for basically 2.5 quarters, then started putting things together offensively and defensively. I really don't know what you say at this point, Manny. I do have a follow-up here to the Vikings 10-2 record, but I just want to get your reaction on another fun victory and just overall being 10-2. If just the 10-2 part, doesn't matter where they're at in standings, doesn't matter what that looks like, just the 10-2 part is really darn fun.
It's really fun, and Sam Darnold's playing really well. And, I think this team, Ross, has a chance to make some noise in the postseason, depending on matchups and everything. We could maybe on a different pod talk about, the situation that the Detroit Lions are in with some of the injuries they have on defense, which can make things very interesting down the stretch here. Philadelphia is obviously playing great. But the Vikings are doing something that a lot of us did not anticipate them doing this year, which is, being one of the best teams in the NFL on the defensive side and offensively as well. And, they have their warts. They're not a perfect team. There's always things to nitpick about them, but I think what they've done, what Sam Darnold has done to sort of turn his career around here has been nothing short of remarkable. And I think that Kevin O'Connell deserves obviously a ton of credit. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah deserves a ton of credit. and the players themselves deserve a lot of credit for what they're doing. This has been a lot of fun. Sam Darnold is just playing really the last couple of games has been outstanding. And I know people, it seems like within the fan base here, Ross and you and I we're both Minnesota natives. We've grown up here, lived here all our lives. So we're, to a degree, we're fans as well, even though we kind of do the media thing as our day jobs. It seems like the fan base, and I've been guilty of this myself when it comes to Gopher football, especially, seems like the fan base likes to dwell on the negative things that have happened instead of looking at sort of the bigger picture and, the overall, end result of what we've seen so far. And it seems like with the Vikings, there's still a little bit of cynicism maybe with Sam Darnold, and people like to go back to the Jacksonville game because the Jags are a bad team and he threw 3 picks in the game. Okay. He still found a way to win, and he's played really, really good football since, and I think when you look at the overall body of work of what he's done, he's been outstanding this year. He really has. Has he been perfect? Of course not. Nobody on the team has been perfect. But I think when you look at the overall body of work that he's done this year and the fact that they're 10-2, literally 10-2, there's not a lot of room for complaints about this as far as I'm concerned.
So I think, and I agree with you on the cynicism and expecting the other shoe to drop. And I'll be honest, I think logically, I do think it's more likely than not that the shoe drops and Sam Darnold at some point in the playoffs, maybe it's round 1, maybe it's an NFC championship game, has to turn into a pumpkin game and just doesn't look very good. And okay, that was a nice run. We're on to J.J. McCarthy next year. But also, Manny, I will submit this, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but what if it doesn't? When Kurt Warner won his Super Bowl, I guarantee you people all season long were saying, this isn't legit. The guy was bagging groceries a year ago. This isn't sustainable. This can't keep up. He won a Super Bowl. Eli Manning's first Super Bowl. I don't think anybody believed that was going to finish in a Super Bowl championship, and it did. And I know there's more examples, and I also know there's not a ton of examples. But it's sports. Anything can happen. Do I believe it? Manny, do I believe it? Absolutely no, I don't believe it. But that doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Just kind of enjoy it for what it is. I will say this. This is kind of the follow-up that I wanted to get to. You and I have talked about numerous times in the past the Vikings, and it's not their fault. It just happens. They don't time their pop-up seasons well. You go back to 2009, they go, 12-4 in the regular season?
Yep.
And they had a bad loss at Chicago, which I think cost them the number 1 seed. But the Saints, the Saints finished with the number 1 seed. So you wind up going there in the championship game. You absolutely won the game, but lost the game on a technicality that the refs rigged it and you turned the ball over too many times. Had you been home, you probably would have won that football game. Fast forward to 2017, where you go 13-3 in the regular season, which more often than not is easily good enough for the number 1 seed. And it wasn't. You wind up being the number 2 seed. You have to go to Philly in the NFC title game. I'm not saying it's going to happen, Manny, but there's a realistic chance this Minnesota Vikings team, they could win 14 games and still wind up being the 5 seed in the playoffs. We got to time our pop-up seasons better. That's all that I'm saying. So we can get more home games, get some of those advantages. And to me, it's just, that's a comical subplot. I don't really know what that means, what you do with that information. But just one of these years, it would be nice when they have an unexpected nice season. I don't think this team is winning 3 road playoff games, Manny. I don't. But again, doesn't mean you can't enjoy the ride, and any win, you have a good time celebrating.
Yeah, well, the tough thing is the 1 year where they did have the number 1 seed and home field advantage, they kicked it
We're
away.
not talking about that, Manny. We're not talking about it.
They kicked it wide left in the NFC Championship game.
I don't know if you know this.
Did I say that out loud?
I don't know if you know this, but Gary Anderson hasn't missed a field goal all year.
Here's what I will say. I think, and this Vikings team is not perfect, but I think what they have going for them is They have an ability on the defensive side, and there are concerns on the defensive side, I think, particularly in the secondary. But they have an ability to make timely plays on the defensive side when they need it the most. We saw it on Sunday with the two interceptions that Kyler Murray threw. Now, the first one that he threw to Byron Murphy Jr. was just,
it was a punt, basically a punt.
It was a punt, but to the Vikings' credit, the pressure that they were able to put on Kyler Murray in that situation and get him sort of rolled out, and he's all of a sudden just dancing around and circling and just heaving the ball up into the air. Like, the Vikings defense deserves credit for putting Kyler Murray in that situation to where he's forced to do that. And then Shaq Griffin gets the interception to seal the game at the end. So it's going to take things like that to continue, I think, for them on the defensive side. The way they get after the quarterback with Jonathan Grenard. I mean, Ross, Jonathan Grenard, I don't think it's been stated enough how good a signing that was. He's been fantastic for that defense all season long.
If you think about it, Manny, the Vikings essentially, when you factor in the cap and how the money was spent, essentially traded Danielle Hunter for Jonathan Grenard and Blake Cashman. And I would say, all things being equal, would you like to have all three of them? Absolutely. I think you'd still love to have Danielle Hunter here. But if that is, quote unquote, the trade, that's a hell of a return for the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings, by the way, Manny, undefeated when Blake Cashman plays. They'll lose at some point.
That's right.
But that's also a fun subplot. He was all over the place on Sunday, and I think he's still a little dinged up. I don't think that turf toe is going to be 100% until the season's over.
He's been great, and he's the green dot linebacker, so he's the guy that when he wasn't out there against Detroit, against the Rams, you could see it. Like, he's the guy that's out there putting everybody else on defense in position, in the right position, making all the calls. So he's huge. He's a major part of the defensive success. And so Bernard's been great. Van Ginkel's been really good. Even, guys like Harrison Phillips have been contributing. Jerry Tillery's been okay, I think, as an interior defensive lineman. Jonathan Bullard's been okay. Maybe that might be a position where they kind of look to upgrade in the offseason, maybe. But right now, those guys I think have been okay. It's the secondary right now is where I kind of have the concern with the defense, because if the front seven is not, wreaking havoc and just causing all sorts of chaos, then, quarterbacks are going to be able to kind of pick the secondary apart just because of sort of the age and, the fact that they have to kind of play in zone because they don't really do a lot of man-to-man.
Well, and they got really banged up on Sunday. We'll see if Fabian Moreau has to start. And in all honesty, we all know this about Kirk Cousins. If you give him time, he will pick apart a defense. So I actually expect, and it sounds like Kirk Cousins will still be the starting quarterback on Sunday. I don't have many doubts that Kirk Cousins will play a great game on Sunday. So the Vikings are going to have to score some points and maybe throw some things at him defensively that he's not used to seeing. But he was also here last year when Brian Flores was here. So I think that chess game and the game within the game on Sunday will be very fun to watch. And it'll be interesting to see as the week goes on what the injury report looks like for the Vikings, who's available on defense and who won't be. One final question on the Vikings. I'll actually give my answer in short before I ask the question. My answer is I'm not super worried. It's an issue, but I'm not super worried. The question is, how worried are you, and how worried should Vikings fans be about the Aaron Jones fumbling issue?
I think it's a concern because we've seen it for a couple of weeks now. Sunday, if it continues on Sunday, I think it might be DEFCON 5. I don't know. But the tough thing is Ross, they need him.
Right.
They need him.
That's kind of the bigger issue, Manny. Even if he's fumbling once a game, you kind of have to still feed it to him because he can do and brings to the offense what Ty Chandler and Cam Akers can't. I'll give Cam Akers credit. He's been way more serviceable than I thought he was going to be when the Vikings reacquired him. And that's a credit to the Vikings front office to say, hey, we can use this guy and it's not going to cost us a lot.
Yeah.
But he can't do what Aaron Jones can do. So I think the Vikings when I say I'm not worried, it is a concern, but I do think at some point it'll get figured out, or you just kind of have to live with the consequences.
Yeah, well, it might have already been figured out for all we know. I mean, I think maybe Kevin O'Connell pulling him out of the game for a little bit there, sort of that middle part of the Arizona game the other day, might have been. I mean, you mentioned with Sam Darnold, sort of the unplugging and plugging back in. Maybe that was kind of a thing for Aaron Jones as well. We're just kind of sitting him down for a little bit, letting him sort of clear his head, because as a player, I'm assuming he has the fumble against Chicago, and then he's fumbling twice against Arizona. One of them gets lost. Now you got to think it's in his head now. And so now he's thinking about it, and he's being really tough on himself. He's a very humble player, really good teammate. So he doesn't want to let his guys down. And maybe just KOC kind of pulling him out of the game for a little bit, let him sort of gather his thoughts, just relax a little bit, take some of that pressure off of him, and then putting him back in the game. And he was fine after that. Obviously scored the winning, what ended up being the winning touchdown. Maybe that was what solved the problem, you know what I mean? But he had some fumbles earlier in the season too. So you just have to hope that it's something that can be cleaned up here down the stretch, because like I was saying, Ross, they need him. They need him to be at his best. They need him to be healthy, which I think having Cam Akers as the RB2, I think is a big thing, because, you know, Cam Akers isn't a perfect player, but he's a really good RB2. Like that.
Yeah.
If you're telling me Cam Akers is my backup running back, sign me up, because he's pretty good at that. So, yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about the fumbling with Aaron Jones, but I think, you know, Sunday against Atlanta, the next week against Chicago, I think will be kind of the tell of like where that's going to be headed.
Manny, I don't know if I've had the opportunity to do this, but a sincere happy holiday season to you. I'm just looking down at my little computer phone, and I see it's December 3rd, which means we are legitimately 3 weeks away from Christmas, which is terrifying because, Manny, you know me about as well as anybody else. Most years by December 3rd, what percentage would you say I've completed of Christmas shopping?
Most of the time, I would say 75%.
Yeah, I'm at 0% this year.
Yeah, I haven't done any either. I know.
I got to get going, and I say all that to say this. If you're like me or you're looking for the perfect gift, everybody knows a coffee drinker in their inner circle or their family. Why not give Beans Coffee Company a try this holiday season? 'Tis the season for giving. And yeah, Beans Coffee Company, coffeebybeans.com is the place to check out. I'm on that Perfectus and Mikado, but there's plenty of blends and varieties for everybody's palate. You know, you'll likely outdo Santa this year if you give that special someone in your life some Beans coffee. Use the promo code SPORTSCHAT at checkout. SPORTSCHAT at checkout is going to save you some cash, and also all orders of $35 or more ship for free. Perfect for holiday giving. The website is coffeebybeans.com. That is coffeebybeans.com. Promo code SPORTSCHAT. Again, I recommend the Mikado or the Perfectus. But seriously, look at what you like. Light roast, dark roast, medium roast. Give it a try. I know once you do, you'll keep coming back to it. That website again, coffeebybeans.com. In closing, Manny, Gophers finished the year 7-5. They go to Camp Randall on Black Friday. They win 24-7. The head coach talked about it in the postgame. If they could take a few plays back, they probably would have won that game by even a bigger margin, maybe, 31-7, 34-7. Wisconsin, and I was there. I made a quick day trip. I mean, you could see it. They're struggling. They're in a bad way. But anytime you can beat your rival, and Wisconsin is the Gophers' chief rival, and you now have won in Camp Randall 3 of the last 4 times. PJ Fleck moves to 4-4 against Wisconsin. Take everything else out, Manny. We've talked about this ad nauseum over the last 5 years. There has been some meat left on the bone. Absolutely. But there's been some very nice wins and some good seasons mixed in there. If you would have told me 8 years ago that at this point, this regime would be 4-4 against Wisconsin, independent of what Wisconsin looks like, independent of how the season's turned out, I think, yeah, we'd all like more. But having lost 14 in a row to the Badgers at the time, I think everybody would have said, hey, 4-4 over 8 years, that's great. I think we all would have taken that. And I'm not, this team I think easily could have won 9 or 10 games, but I think you can also flip that the other way and say, well, they could have lost 2 more. So yeah. I guess at the end of the year, Manny, I'm just not going to be super upset in any year you beat Wisconsin. That's my roundabout way of saying that. And it's really satisfying for a change to see, and who knows, maybe next year Wisconsin goes 10-2. But for now, it's really satisfying to see them absolutely dysfunctional and Manny wretched. That offense is putrid right now. Dreadful.
Yeah. I think the days of Wisconsin getting away with, say for the Russell Wilson year, the days of Wisconsin getting away with mediocre at best quarterback play with just big farm boy offensive lines that are just going to plow you over and you're going to beat everybody.
Cornbread Midwesterners.
Yeah, I mean those days of being able to win 9-10 games a year doing that, I think are over. Like it's college football has changed, and with these super conferences now, you're gonna any given year Wisconsin and I give them credit because Oregon, the number 1 team in the country, went in there and they gave the Ducks a dogfight, and that was a 16-13 type of thing. They very well could have won that game and beat the number 1 team in the country, and maybe the perception of them is different, but I just think those days of the Brett Bielema, Barry Alvarez, we're going to beat you with mediocre quarterbacks and we're just going to run it down your throats and win 9, 10, 11 games a year doing that. I think those days are over, and they're going to have to, Luke Fickell's going to have to reevaluate just sort of, with the NIL stuff going, kicking in with college football. They're going to have to reevaluate some things. Don't rush to do that. By all means, take your time figuring it out. Because we like going into Camp Randall and beating you, but it's just gonna, the way they've done things for the last 30 years is gonna have to change now.
So I like stomping on people's graves, Manny, when I can, and Lord knows Badgers fans did it for literally, as I joked, 3.5 presidential administrations, maybe not 3.5 different presidents, but when you win 14 years in a row, that is literally 3.5 presidential terms. Okay. Yeah. So I listened to some Badger wine line on the way back, watched some podcasts, and the one thing that they're all talking about, and I actually agree with them, and some of these podcasts, by the way, shout out to people who have Badger podcasts. I'll be honest, really good podcasts. I'm blanking. One of them was I think it's called the Bucky Report. I thought the 2 guys did a very nice job. So shout out to them. That's the first time I've ever really put any thought into it. Can you really run the air raid in November in Wisconsin? I mean, honestly, I think that's one of the biggest problems. And, look, Braden Locke might not be very good, but I also don't know how much you can sling the ball around the field. Manny, it was 22 degrees at its high on Friday, and I'm not even sure it ever felt like 22 degrees. So I think you can. The Gophers showed it. I mean, Max Brosmer had a nice day passing the football. I think as long as it's dry, I think you can. But can you consistently, I don't want to turn this into a Wisconsin show, but can you consistently have an offense where you're trying to whip the ball all around the field when you get to late October and November in Minneapolis and Madison and your temperatures are hovering right around 30, give or take? I just don't know if that's the formula for them.
It's a good point. I just think the reality is, though, they didn't play the entire season in those conditions. And they lost a lot of games earlier this year because the quarterback play wasn't good. And I know Braden Locke wasn't, because he wasn't the starter at the start of the year, right? He ended up
he took over for I'll blank on the kid's name, but yeah, he's starting by injury.
Yeah, but so I mean, it's just even just like a couple of years ago when it was like the Hornibrook kid and who was the
didn't they have the Van Dyke or whatever?
Yeah, the Jack Cones and those guys that are just
my favorite was John Stocco.
John Stocco, yeah, Joel.
I think he was one of us too, right? He Richfield, and he went to Wisconsin. He'll never get a job in Minnesota.
Yeah, and again, like to your point, I don't want to make this a Wisconsin because, like I said, take your time in figuring this out.
Yeah,
Luke
but it's fun to stomp on the grave a little bit. It's fun
because I think just with the landscape of college football changing, with NIL and all of that stuff. And look, we could have the same conversation with the Gophers too and PJ Fleck. Like, you're going to have to evolve a little bit, and I think to PJ's credit this year with Max Brosmer, and maybe it's a little bit different when you have a fifth-year senior quarterback who's played a lot of games, albeit FCS level. He's played a lot of games. You're going to have to open things up in your passing game a little bit, because if you fall down by 10 points in the third quarter, for the most part, if you're a PJ Fleck team, it's probably over for you, and at least history has kind of said that, save for like 2019, and honestly, maybe save for like a team like this year who's been able to throw the ball a little bit more. Now you're going to lose those two receivers who've been pretty good for you this year, but I like what some of the things that I saw this year in the passing game. I like to see it from PJ. It's just stop running the ball on 3rd and 9 inside your opponent's 20-yard line and settling for field goals. Stop doing that, PJ.
Do you know what's funny? They had success early on with that in his tenure. In their first year when they rallied the back half of the year to get to the mighty Quick Lane Bowl. And then in 2019, they had success running on 3rd and long. And I think he's always liked to go back to that. The difference was those teams also had rock star wide receivers that you had to account for more on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. So I think it was a bit easier to occasionally spring the 15-yard run on 3rd and long. So, no, it's funny because then I have the exact opposite complaint with the Vikings. I know the Vikings aren't a great run team, but I think the Vikings pass the ball far too often on 3rd and 1 and 3rd and 2. And then you look at the Gophers and it's 3rd and 10 and they're handing the ball off.
Yeah, it's third and 1 and Sam Darnold's throwing a 45-yard pass down the field. It's like, why? Just turn the ball around and hand it off. Get the first down.
A very quick question in closing, and then I have Tommy Sports Weekly with Corbu Status to hop to. That is available on Apple and Spotify, by the way, audio-only podcast for those interested in St. Thomas athletics. Interesting when it comes to PJ Fleck. I think I've made no bones about this. I've talked about this numerous times. I thought this year was a logical jumping off point for him. Not that I want him to leave. I just think at some point you have to reset your clock, and maybe you go somewhere else and you start over and you have maybe, I don't want to say lower expectations because I don't think the expectations amongst some are that Minnesota should win the Big Ten title every year. I would just like one in my lifetime. But I don't think the expectations here are quite where they might be at other places. But still, your next year will technically be year 9. You think, okay, this might be a decent jumping off point. He absolutely tried to get the UCLA job. I don't care what anybody else says. People that I trust have told me that was a real thing, and I do believe that.
I don't know why he would want that job.
I also don't think he hates being here either. I just think he understands the advantages of maybe starting over. Sure. And again, I don't know that for truth. I just trust the people that I've talked to. I'm now kind of convinced. I'll say 78% sure that he's back here next year. I think the one to watch would be North Carolina, but right now, Manny, as of this morning, we only have 3 Power 5 jobs open. We have Purdue. He's not leaving Minnesota for Purdue. 8 years ago, he would have taken that Purdue job. He wanted that job, didn't get it. He's not taking that job now. He's not going to Central Florida. He's not gonna coach in the Big 12 for, well, politely, even though they've had a nice season here and there. That's kind of an also ran team. And would North Carolina, is that a home run hire for them? If those are the only 3 Power 5 jobs that are open, and I expect more will come open, I'm fairly convinced he's back next year, and I'm okay with that. Because I would like to see, what does a redshirt freshman Drake Lindsay look like? I would kind of like to see that. And if PJ goes, I'm assuming Drake Lindsay follows him or goes to Arkansas or goes somewhere else.
Yeah, I think, that you'd look around at all the jobs that are open. Like you said, there's 3 power conference jobs open.
Also,
most of the
very
jobs
quickly,
that are open are the group of 4, group of 5, whatever conference jobs.
Good for Gus Malzahn saying, I'm old and don't want to deal with this current college football anymore. I'm just going to go be an offensive coordinator at Florida State. Get fired with Norvell next year and go figure something else out.
Yeah, Chip Kelly did the same thing with UCLA last year. He left and became the OC at Ohio State.
And last year, remember, we had 2 group of 5 head coaches leave to be position coaches because they're like, my roster is purged every year. So I'm not saying I love the state of current college football, but I do love the coaches that are like, oh, bleep this. I'm just going to be a position coach or a coordinator. This is stupid.
Yeah, Nick Saban just said, bleep this. I'm done.
Yeah,
I don't want this smoke anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, my hunch is that PJ's back, and I guess I'd like to see that. Again, I understand the hatred that he gets. At times, I'm very critical of him. And I also don't want to be that guy that says, well, you shouldn't get rid of him because who are you going to get that's better? I've always said that's not my job. That's up to the athletic director and the people that he trusts to find somebody that's better.
And there will be options. If he were to leave, there will be options out
Correct.
there.
Correct.
That you can bring in. Yeah.
And people will take this job because it is a Big Ten job, and somebody will say, I'll be the first coach in 70 years to make them Big Ten champions, because they all have egos, which they should, and they all believe it. But I would also say this. Wouldn't Dan Mullen be hilarious here? Okay. By the way, what if Dan Mullen was here? That's not going to happen. But
it's not going to happen. But I would love it.
Jimbo Fisher would be hilarious. I think he's probably not particularly a great person or a great coach, but he'd be hilarious. But I just think by and large, you can rip PJ and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. But I do think if you don't think he's been successful here, then I question your judgment, because he absolutely has been successful. When you look at history, comparing Gopher football eras and decades. And again, I'm not saying it's not without flaws and that they shouldn't have done more. They absolutely should have done more. But it's not like every Big Ten win he gets is against an awful 2-10 Purdue team. There have been some really nice wins along the way. There have also been brutal losses. And those are the ones that I criticize him the most for, because it seems like every year there is just an inexplicable dumb loss. And in hindsight, Rutgers might not be as bad of a loss this year as it was 3 weeks ago, but it's still a game you shouldn't lose. So Those are the things that I'm critical of him. But if you're going to beat your chief rival every other time, I don't know at this university what more you can ask for.
The people that are ready to shove PJ Fleck out the door are the ones that I think are really misguided. I think it's fair to criticize him. I think it's fair to say, like you said, that there's been some meat left on the bones. I've certainly been critical. And I think if he gets to a point where he's ready to move on, I'm okay with that as well, because I think they can find somebody to replace him. But the people that are just saying, fire him, get him out of here, he's terrible, he's awful. It's just like, come on, guys. Stop with the hyperbole. Like we can, we're better than that. We're smarter than that.
Stop with the hyperbole. I don't know why I love calling it hyperbole. What is going on? You are a big time news star now. I saw you on Fox 9 with Amy Hockert. If you wouldn't mind, please tell everybody about MPS Voices, and maybe not specifically, oh boy, here's this great content you need to listen to. I think it's more of why you should support MPS Voices. And I came from Jazz 88. I spent some time there. You're there now. What you're doing at Minneapolis Public Schools is awesome. I'm in awe of it. I wish I could be more involved, but just tell everybody about MPS Voices and even Jazz 88 if you don't mind.
Yeah, the goal for MPS Voices is to give students and staff of the district a voice and a platform to create content. And, we're really growing, and, we just hope to continue to support something that, we hope the listeners continue to support something that can really continue to grow, has a lot more room for growth, and can really be something special. And the people that we brought in have been great. Our new sports director is off to a great start. You and I both know him pretty well. So just continue to support what we're doing. It's for the students. It's a platform for the students, and we're excited about where we're headed.
That is Mr. Manny Hill. I am Ross Brendel, and I will see you again next week in this feed, I think. I don't know. Whenever. Judd Zolgad just popped in on the other side, by the way. I'm going to wave to him. Thanks, Manny. Thanks, Manny. I appreciate it.
You got it, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Back again in this feed real soon.